Hello, and welcome back. This is your lead instructor, Gennaro Washington here, CEO of Cortex Solutions, and today we're going to be talking about cloud forensics. So cloud. Now, as we know, it has transformed literally how we do everything, how we store information, how we process information. Now, you will see cloud environments from a small startup to actually multinational corporations. Now, cloud environments, and we'll talk more about this as we get into it, but just know that cloud, as we talked about before, you can have multiple tenants, you can have multiple deployment clouds, you can have multiple deployment methods. It's really just dependent upon the organization. But today we're going to be talking more about the challenges of how to investigate, how to collect data and secure that data when incidents occur within the cloud environment. Now, a cloud application, right? It's an application on a web server usually. Now, this is forensics of cloud technologies. So what we're doing here is that same process. We're identifying, collecting, preserving the data, analyzing, and even reporting. But some of the core challenges that you won't really see on-prem are going to be the shared responsibility model, SRM, the multi-tenancy, right? We talked about that before as well. And legal jurisdictions too, because, well, you're going over multiple geographical locations. To understand the process, just think about forensics, and then you put cloud into that. So you have identification, okay, collection of that data, preservation of that data, reporting, making sure that, and we're going to talk about it again, the chain of custody is utmost important to keep in line because we do not want to break that. So organizations, right, they must prepare systems and policies because we're trying to enable evidence collection, right? That's what we're really trying to do. We have a ton of tools that we can utilize. Specifically, we can talk about AWS, you have Google Cloud, you have Azure, but they all have their own platforms for monitoring the activity, looking at the logs. You can also use tools such as FTK, Xways. Now, these are great for digital forensics if you're looking at the actual workflow of the cloud itself. And then you can also use open source tools like Log2 Timeline. Because again, we're looking at the logs, right? We have to understand what actually happened, and what better way to look to see what transpired within this time frame than looking at a log or two. So the legal and ethical considerations, like we talked about before, there's always going to be that. So you have to understand the GDPR, the HIPAA, the laws that govern that specific area. Chain of custody, like I talked about before, you want to make sure that that evidence is maintained. You have to. If not, you're not going to be able to use that evidence right in court. Not at all. So you have to understand, if you're a cloud service provider, what are you allowed to actually, retain? What type of data are we looking at here? So let's talk about it a little bit more in depth, look at some of the types of incidents that can occur. And again, I won't go through all this because we've talked about this before, but just look at it from this perspective, from a cloud perspective. So the key is to really understand how the architecture is put into place. What does that infrastructure look like underneath? So some of those types of data breaches you have, like securing information, right? Someone is trying to obtain information and they actually do that. That's a data breach. The propagation of malware. Think of worms. So you want to investigate malware that are introduced to those different platforms like SaaS and PaaS. And then what if an account is compromised? Well, so you want to be able to track these different accounts, especially their administrator accounts. And then misconfiguration. So think about AWS, they have their buckets. So a configuration issue, one of the biggest, not all of them, like not the majority, but one of the biggest concerns is always misconfiguration of a security configuration file, such as S3 buckets. We're talking about errors that can lead to a breach too. So what are the steps? We talked about it before, right? Well, detection and triage. We have to understand the cloud native tool itself and identify what patterns are actually normal versus not normal. You want to be able to identify the log files, the disks that are associated with this, take snapshots if needed, and then utilizing your CSP APIs, right? That cloud service provider, the APIs or tools to acquire the actual data, and then analyze it from a dynamic or static environment, okay? And then report on everything. Just report on everything. Not everything, but you can fine tune it, report on things that matter. So what are the essential skills for cloud forensic experts? Well, to succeed in cloud forensics, you need to have a few skills. All right, you need to know about cloud technologies. You need to have a really deep understanding of how AWS, Fargate, GCP, as in your Google Cloud, BigQuery, or Azure, blob storage. You have to understand at a deep, fundamental level of how they actually work. And then layer that on with digital forensics, right? Because if you understand how the disk and memory, how to utilize volatile and non-volatile memory, right? If you know how they differ within the cloud settings, that'll help you out as well too. And then just being skillful within Python or PowerShell to help automate your forensics tasks. That's really the main reason, the main driver for that. And then with incident response, well, being able to actually coordinate the response. Because again, within your IRP, you're going to have everyone you need to talk to. So including your CSP, so add them in. But what are some of the data sources within the cloud? Well, you have your logs, that we talked about before, virtual machines, even your storages, and your network traffic. These are all data sources that can help understand, well, what's actually happening within the cloud, within these systems. Some of the constraints, though. Well, we have real-time monitoring, obviously, right? Because, well, to ensure that, despite the volatile nature of RAM, we have to make sure that we can actually get that data, okay? What about the extraction of data? Well, to navigate an API, right, from a CSP, it's going to take some time. They may do things a little bit differently. And when it comes to encryption, some of the challenges that may face are going to be decrypting user-managed keys, right, without actually harming the data integrity that's there. Okay, automating your log retrieval is a solution for this, for one of them, right? Ensuring that the forensic snapshot of the storage volumes are taken frequently, right? Because again, we don't want to skip a beat here and miss valuable data of an actual breach. Hackers that can access and open an S3 bucket containing PI, right? So we want to be able to analyze the access logs to figure out, okay, what actually happened. Identify, well, what changed, if anything did change, if permissions changed. And then recommend, well, some access control policies to mitigate the actual risk itself. These are ways that you can go about handling misconfigurations. And we talked about it before. Security configuration files are one of the main things that cause issues. And it's been great. Gennaro here, CEO of Cortex Solutions, and we just talked about cloud forensics, brought to you by ACSMI. I hope you have a great one. Looking forward to seeing the next one. Take care.